Gwendolyn Meyers had always believed in the power of people, not just numbers, charts, or slogans, but the living, breathing connections that transformed brands from names into movements. At 27, she stood at the head of her own marketing consultancy, Meyers Strategies, a firm she had been carefully nurturing for the past 5 years. Her journey hadn't been easy. In the early days, she'd rented a corner of a shared office with nothing more than a refurbished laptop, a few clients willing to take a chance on her vision, and a relentless determination. She worked late nights crafting campaigns, fueled by coffee and an unshakable belief that her approach to marketing was different. Networking wasn't just a skill for Gwendolyn, it was her gift. She could walk into a crowded gala, a stiff boardroom, or a neighborhood business mixer, and by the end of the night, she'd know half the room by name. More importantly, they would remember her. She had a way of listening that made people feel seen, a way of speaking that made possibilities sound inevitable. Now, 5 years in, her firm was on the cusp of something bigger. She had just signed her first corporate rebranding deal with a regional chain of restaurants struggling to adapt in a changing market. To her, the challenge wasn't intimidating. It was exhilarating. Every company has a story, she told her small but loyal team one morning as sunlight poured into their modest downtown office. Our job is to dig it up, polish it, and make sure the world hears it. Her desire wasn't just to make companies grow, but to help them transform, to shed outdated images, to expand into new markets, to rise with renewed purpose. Gwendolyn thrived in that space between what a company was and what it could become. Yet beneath her calm confidence lay the weight of responsibility. She carried the dreams of her employees, the trust of her clients, and the unspoken expectation of proving herself as a young black woman in a field often dominated by older, established names. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she pressed forward, blending strategy with soul, analytics with artistry. Her clients came not just for her ideas, but for her belief in them. And when Gwendolyn believed in you, it felt like the world might too. The bell above the door jingled as Gwendolyn Meyers slipped into Maggie's diner, the place she always came when she needed to think. The scent of fresh coffee and warm biscuits filled the air, grounding her after a week of back-to-back client calls. She loved the diner's simplicity, the faded red booths, the hum of conversation, the sense that no matter what storms raged outside, Maggie's remained steady. Sliding into her usual booth by the window, Gwen noticed someone across the room who didn't quite fit the atmosphere that day. Brody Tucker. She had seen him often, quiet, rugged, with calloused hands that spoke of hard labor. Usually, he exchanged a polite nod before burying himself in his meal. But today, his shoulders sagged, and his eyes looked like he hadn't seen sleep in days. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring into the cup as if it might hold an answer he desperately needed. Something tugged at Gwen's chest. She debated minding her own business, but networking was never just a job for her. It was instinct. Picking up her coffee, she crossed the room. "Mind if I sit?" she asked gently. Brody looked up, startled. "Oh, sure." His voice was hoarse, worn down. For a moment, they sat in silence, then the words spilled out of him. "My dad passed last year. Left me the company. Tucker and Sons Construction. It used to mean something around here. Now." He shook his head, eyes clouded. "He also left me a mountain of debt. I can swing a hammer, pour concrete, build a house with my bare hands. But the business side, the loans, the payroll, the bidding, it's choking me." Gwen listened, her fingers wrapped around her coffee mug. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, and she could hear the raw fear in his voice. "I've got 10 families depending on me," Brody continued. "Guys who've worked with us for years. They look at me for answers, and He broke off, shaking his head again. I don't know if I can keep this thing afloat. Gwen leaned forward, her tone soft but steady. You don't have to have all the answers right now, Brody. What matters is you care enough not to quit. That's something I can work with. For the first time that night, his gaze met hers with a flicker of hope. And in that moment, Gwen knew this wasn't just another conversation. This was the beginning of something bigger for both of them. The diner had grown quieter, the clink of dishes fading as the late crowd trickled out. Gwen studied Brody's worn face, the defeat shadowing his expression. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in entrepreneurs on the edge, in dreamers who had lost their way. But she also saw something else in Brody. Grit, the kind you couldn't buy or teach. You don't have to do this alone, Gwen said. Finally, her voice calm but unwavering. Brody gave a short laugh, humorless. And what? Hire some consultant to tell me everything I'm doing wrong? With what money? I'm barely keeping the lights on. Gwen set her mug down with purpose. Not hire, partner. His brow furrowed. Partner? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. 40% of Tucker and Sons. I'll put my money into the company, restructure your debts and rebrand it. I'll handle the business side, marketing, client growth, positioning. You focus on what you do best, building. Together, we'll give this company a future. Brody blinked, caught between disbelief and desperation. 40%? You'd risk your own money on a company everyone else says is dying? Her lips curved into a small, confident smile. Because I don't see a company that's dying. I see one with roots, history, and a man who refuses to walk away from the people, depending on him. That's not weakness, Brody. That's leadership, and it's the kind of foundation I can build on. The words lingered between them, heavier than the silence. Brody rubbed a hand across his jaw, shaking his head slowly. You barely know. Me? I know enough, Gwen replied. Enough to bet on you. Within a week, Gwen had her lawyer draft the papers. The deal was clear. She bought 40% of Tucker and Sons, giving her both a stake and the authority to implement the sweeping changes she envisioned. For Brody, signing the agreement felt like both surrender and salvation. His father's legacy was no longer solely on his shoulders, and for the first time in months, the weight eased. When the ink dried, Gwen pressed her pen down firmly, her signature bold and certain. She wasn't just investing in concrete and lumber, she was investing in potential, his and hers. And as they left the lawyer's office that afternoon, Brody glanced at her with cautious gratitude. Guess we're in this together now. Gwen's answer was simple, but resolute. All the way, Brody stared at the signed documents on his desk, long after Gwen had left the lawyer's office. The bold signature beside his own felt like both a lifeline and a chain. Tucker and Sons was no longer his alone. His father had carried this company's name with pride, and now Brody wrestled with the uneasy thought that he had given a large part of it away. That night, sleep evaded him. He thought of his crew, the 10 families who counted on his leadership. Would they see him as weak for needing help? Would his father, if he were alive, call him a failure for letting someone else step in? The questions gnawed at him. The next morning, Gwen walked into the office they now shared, radiant in her navy blazer, a tablet tucked under her arm. She noticed the dark circles under Brody's eyes and the stiffness in his shoulders. She didn't press him. Instead, she slid a folder across his desk. Here are the first steps, she said evenly. Debt restructuring, client outreach, and a marketing overhaul. But I want to be clear about something. Brody raised his gaze, wary. I'm not here to take your company from you, Gwen continued. You'll remain the face of Tucker and Sons. The name, the legacy, it's yours. I'll work behind the scenes quietly. Call it a silent partnership. You lead your men, build your houses, shake hands with clients. I'll handle everything else. Her words disarmed him. Silent partner. He could live with that. he could stand, in front of his crew, his clients, and still feel like Tucker and Sons belonged to him. But Gwen's presence was far from silent in practice. Within weeks, her touch began reshaping the company's image. A fresh logo replaced the outdated one his father had drawn up decades ago. Professional brochures and a sleek website gave Tucker and Sons a polish it had never known. She brokered meetings with real estate developers and city planners, planting seeds for contracts Brody wouldn't have imagined landing on his own, and through it all, she let him shine. When the deals closed, when clients shook hands, it was Brody's name, they said aloud. But in the quiet moments, he caught himself watching her, strategic, composed, a force of certainty, and wondered how he'd ever tried to do this alone. Still, the conflict lingered. Brody had always thought being a man meant carrying the weight, alone. Now, with Gwen by his side, he was beginning to learn that sharing the load wasn't weakness. It might just be survival. It happened faster than Brody could have imagined. Just 6 weeks after Gwen stepped in, Tucker and Sons landed a contract with Wellington Developments, a regional firm building a new housing community on the outskirts of town. The project was worth more than anything Brody had signed in years. Steady work for his crew, financial breathing room, and the kind of exposure that could put them back on the map. When the deal closed, Brody shook hands with the Wellington executive, the man's words still ringing in his ears. "We've heard good things about you. Your company has potential." Brody knew those good things hadn't come from chance. They came from Gwen's tireless networking, her knack for putting the right story in the right ears. Driving back from the meeting, Brody's chest swelled with a mix of pride and disbelief. For the first time since his father's death, he felt the spark of hope. He glanced at Gwen in the passenger seat. She wasn't smiling smugly. Instead, she looked calm, collected, as if success had been inevitable. "You did this?" he said, shaking his head with a chuckle. "I told you," she said with a wink. "Potential. All you needed was the right push." That night, Brody surprised her by suggesting they celebrate. They ended up at a cozy bistro downtown, tucked into a corner booth with soft jazz playing overhead. Brody, usually reserved, was more talkative than Gwen had ever seen him. He spoke about his father, how he taught him to build from the ground up, how every house carried a piece of his legacy. He admitted the fears that had kept him up at night, the pressure of being the man everyone turned to. Gwen listened, her eyes never leaving his. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer business advice. She simply let him be Brody Tucker, not just the contractor, not just the son carrying a name, but the man who had been fighting for everyone else while forgetting himself. When the waitress brought out dessert on the house, a slice of warm apple pie with 2 spoons, Brody grinned. "Guess we're partners in more ways than one tonight." Gwen laughed, light and genuine. For the first time, the weight between them didn't feel like business. It felt like possibility. And as they toasted with their glasses of wine, Brody couldn't help but wonder if this partnership might change more than just the future of Tucker and Sons. The weeks following their first big win brought a rhythm Brody hadn't known in years. His crew worked steadily, morale was high, and clients began calling again. Yet behind the scenes, Gwen was already looking further ahead. One evening, after a long day of site visits, she sat across from Brody in the office conference room, spreadsheets and proposals spread out between them. "You've got momentum now," she said, tapping her pen against the table. "But if we want Tucker and Sons to last, we need more than contracts. We need backing, investors who see where the market is, heading, not just where it's been." Brody leaned back, brow furrowed. "Investors? You mean giving away more of the company?" "Not giving away," Gwen corrected smoothly. "Strategically aligning. The construction industry always shifting. Green builds, smart homes, sustainability. If we partner with progressive investors, people who believe in innovation and diversity, they'll open doors money alone can't." Brody rubbed the back of his neck. "And if we don't, Then old money will come sniffing around, Gwen said firmly, her eyes locking with his. They'll see your growth and want control. They'll throw cash at you, but limit your talent, force you to fit their mold. And trust me, once they're on your board, they'll box you in. I won't let that happen. Her conviction silenced him. For a moment, Brody just studied her. This woman who had walked into his life at his lowest point and was now fighting for his future as if it were her own. He wanted to argue, to cling to the independence his father had prized, but deep down he knew she was right. The market was changing. If Tucker and Sons didn't adapt, it would be left behind. All right, he said at last, exhaling. Show me what you've got. A smile spread across Gwen's face, equal parts pride and determination. Within days, she arranged introductions with investors who believed in sustainable building and board candidates who brought fresh perspectives. Engineer who had pioneered green roofing, a Latina entrepreneur who'd scaled her own construction supply company, a financial strategist who grew up in the very neighborhoods Tucker and Sons wanted to serve. Each meeting stretched Brody, forced him to see beyond the blueprints and job sites. And though the bond between him and Gwen deepened with each late-night strategy session, they kept their lines clear, professional. But even in that professionalism, Brody could feel it. Gwen wasn't just building a company, she was rebuilding him. Gwen told Brody, we need a cover-up for this partnership. Don't hide the partnership itself, but let's keep my name a secret. From now, identify your secret partner as Sam. Okay, where did that name come from? Gwen laughs. My dad wanted a boy, but got 3 girls. He said if I was a boy, he was going to name me Sam after his grandfather. What if someone asks for a last name? Then tell them it's just Sam, the person who saw potential in me. When no one else did, that's all they need to know. The first official board meeting of Tucker and Sons was nothing like Brody expected. He'd braced himself for stiff formality, for people who didn't understand his world of dirt lots and lumber, but instead, he found himself surrounded by energy and ideas. After the meeting, Gwen caught him lingering at the doorway, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Well, she asked. Brody's lips tugged into a slow smile. They get it. They actually get it. They do, Gwen replied. Because they see beyond tradition. Diversity isn't about checking boxes, it's about perspective. Old money would have told you to cut corners, save $1 today and pay for it tomorrow. But this board, they're building for the future. Brody nodded, the weight in his chest easing. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was walking alone. His father had built Tucker and Sons with grit and sweat. But Gwen was teaching him that it could also be built with vision and strategy. Later that night, as he reviewed the board's recommendations, he realized something else. He wasn't just preserving his father's legacy anymore. With Gwen and this board by his side, he was creating a legacy of his own. The office lights burned long into the night more often than not. Blueprints sprawled across the conference table, laptops glowing with projections, and the quiet hum of determination filled the air. Gwen and Brody worked side by side until the city outside fell silent. It was during those hours, when exhaustion softened their edges, that something shifted. Gwen would pause mid-sentence, only for Brody to finish, her thought as if he'd been reading her mind. She'd laugh, surprised, and he'd smile, a little stunned himself. The air between them grew heavier, charged, whenever they leaned in over the same set of notes, their shoulders nearly brushing. But every time their closeness threatened to spill into something more, Brody pulled back. In the solitude of his truck after those meetings, he would grip the steering wheel and shake his head. She's brilliant, driven, out of my league. He told himself Gwen deserved someone polished, someone who could match her in boardrooms and strategy sessions. Not a man who spent his days in steel-toed boots and calloused hands. Meanwhile, Gwen fought a different battle. She'd catch herself lingering on the sound of his laugh, the way his steady presence grounded her when her ideas ran wild. There was a warmth in him that reminded her of everything simple and good. And yet, each time the thought of more crept in, she shut it down with ruthless efficiency. Focus. Your company needs you. No distractions. One evening, as they wrapped up another marathon session, Gwen stretched, her blazer slipping off her shoulders. Brody glanced at her, quickly averting his gaze before the weight of his own thoughts betrayed him. "You're quiet." "Tonight," she said, tilting her head. "Just thinking," he replied. "You've got so much ahead of you, Gwen. Sometimes I wonder if I'm even—" He stopped himself, clamping down on the vulnerability spilling out. She frowned, sensing the words unsaid. "Brody, you're the reason Tucker and Sons still stands. Don't sell yourself short." Their eyes held longer than either intended. A moment teetered on the edge of confession, unspoken feelings hovering between them. But Gwen was the first to look away. She snapped her laptop shut, the sound breaking the spell. "Big day tomorrow," she said briskly. "Let's call it a night." As Brody gathered his things, his chest tightened. They both wanted more. But for now, the lines remained unbroken, drawn by fear, duty, and ambition. 3 years had passed since Gwendolyn Meyers walked into that diner and sat across from Brody. Tucker, what began as a desperate gamble, had grown into a powerhouse partnership, though the world only ever saw one side of it. The morning sunlight filtered into the sleek new Tucker & Sons office, its glass walls a far cry from the cramped, dusty space where they started. Gwen leaned against the edge of Brody's desk, arms crossed, her eyes steady on him. "The company's outgrowing your old routine," she said. "You can't just be the guy swinging a hammer anymore. You need to step fully into leadership, full-time. In the office, overseeing strategy, job sites should be visits, not your daily grind." Brody rubbed the back of his neck. Even after all this time, he sometimes slipped into old habits. "You're saying I've got to wear a suit more than a tool belt," Gwen smirked. "Exactly. You've built your credibility with your hands. Now it's time to build your legacy with your presence." Over the years, Brody had changed. The hesitant contractor burdened by debt was gone. In his place stood a man whose confidence filled the boardroom as surely as it once did the construction site. He spoke with authority, negotiated with power, and commanded respect. But even as his role expanded, one thing remained the same. His reliance on Gwen. She was his anchor. When contracts overwhelmed him, she broke them down. When investors doubted, she sharpened his message. At conferences and galas, she walked at his side, officially his marketing consultant, never his silent partner. No one knew the depth of her stake in the company, and that was how they kept it. Clean, professional, untouchable. Still, people noticed. They noticed the striking image of the tall, confident contractor and the poised, brilliant black woman beside him. Together, they commanded attention. Whispers spread through boardrooms and industry circles. Who is she? What's their story? The speculation only amplified Gwendolyn's own firm, Meyers Strategies. Just by association, her name circulated in places she had once only dreamed of entering. She became the strategist to know, the consultant who could transform a brand, because she had transformed him. But behind closed doors, the truth lingered unspoken. She had pushed him into power, shaping his image, steadying his steps. He shone under the spotlight, and she remained in the shadows, by choice, by necessity. And yet, as she watched him deliver another flawless pitch to a room of investors, Gwen couldn't help but wonder, how long could they keep their secret roles hidden? The autumn air carried a chill as Brody pulled into the quiet neighborhood where Samantha lived. He wasn't sure what to expect. Gwen rarely invited anyone into her personal space, not even him. Most of their conversations happened in offices, conference centers, or over coffee at late-night diners. But tonight she had asked him to dinner at her home. When she opened the door, dressed casually in soft gray slacks and a silk blouse, Brody felt a flicker of surprise. She looked different here, warmer, less guarded, yet still every bit as composed. The smell of roasted vegetables and something rich wafted through the air. "Come in," she said with a small smile. "I figured it was time we had a real conversation, without whiteboards and spreadsheets between us." The meal was simple but comforting, her way of grounding what she knew would be a difficult talk. Over plates of food and a bottle of red wine, Sam finally leaned back in her chair, her eyes steady on his. "My company's growing faster than I expected," she began. "I'm taking on clients across the region, and my name is getting out there. It means I can't always be at every event with you, can't always shield you the way I used to." She paused, her voice softening. "But there's something else I need to tell you, Brody. Something I've tried to ignore." His chest tightened. "I care about you," she said firmly. "Not just as a partner in business, not just as a consultant. I care about you, the man. But I also know the future I've built depends on discipline, and letting myself get lost in feelings." She shook her head gently. "I can't risk losing focus now." Brody's hands tightened around his glass. For 3 years he'd buried his own emotions, convinced she deserved more than a man like him. But tonight, in her kitchen light, he couldn't hide it. "You're not alone in that," he admitted. "I've wanted to tell you for a long time. You've been more than a partner to me. You've been my anchor, my reason this company is still alive. But you're right. If we cross that line, everything we've worked for could unravel." Silence settled between them, thick with the weight of what could be and what couldn't. Finally, Gwen reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Then let's make a promise," she said. "No matter what, we'll be there for each other, personally, professionally, always. We don't let anyone come between us." Brody's eyes softened as he closed his hand around hers. "Always," he echoed. They sat like that for a long moment, two people bound not by romance, but by something deeper: trust, loyalty, and a shared dream bigger than themselves. It wasn't the love story either of them secretly longed for, but it was theirs. And as Brody left that night, the crisp air biting his skin, he carried with him a quiet certainty. Whatever the future brought, he and Gwen, who has now become Sam, would face it together. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, and the murmur of voices thick with power and influence. Brody Tucker had learned to navigate these events over the years, though he still preferred a muddy job site to a room full of tailored suits and calculated smiles. That night, however, he found himself caught in the orbit of someone who embodied everything Gwen had warned him about: Emma Carson. Emma was old money through and through, elegant, sharp, and disarmingly charming. She had the kind of smile that made men lean closer, and the kind of pedigree that opened doors before she even knocked. She seemed to know everyone, and within minutes of meeting Brody, she was weaving him seamlessly into her circle of wealthy investors and influential decision-makers. "You've done wonders with Tucker and Sons," Emma said one evening over champagne, her voice smooth as silk. "But with the right allies, you could be more than a regional player. You could be national, global." Brody nodded politely, though her words echoed the pitch of countless others Gwen had warned him about. He admired Emma's confidence, but it carried an edge that set him on guard. Still, over the next few months, Emma became a fixture at his side during social events. She always knew the right introductions, the right whispers to feed the press, the right champagne flutes to clink at just the right time. To outsiders, she looked like the perfect match for Brody's growing stature. People speculated, assumed. He paired them in headlines he didn't ask for. Yet when the conversations shifted from pleasantries to business, Brody's resolve never wavered. Emma would lean in, her perfume heady, and say, "This is a sure bet. These men know how to multiply. Money, Brody, trust them." And he would shake his head. "Can't do it. Not with the agreement of my private partner," she arched a brow. "Partner? What partner?" "Sam," Brody replied without hesitation. "That private partner wouldn't like this. It's too conservative. Or worse, it's not the direction. We're taking. Emma's smile never faltered, but her patience thinned. She pressed harder, arranging meetings with her father's associates, dangling promises of faster growth, greater prestige. Brody, polite but firm, refused them all. Finally, one evening after a gala, she cornered him outside on the marble steps, her tone sharper than usual. "What hold does this private partner person have over you?" she demanded. "If that person is just a business partner, buy them. Out. Take control once and for all." Brody's jaw tightened, his voice low but steady. "This company exists because of that partner. Sam believed in me when no one else did. Finance my company, put in time and reputation on the line when I had nothing to offer. Tucker and Sons is as much Sam as it is mine. None of this," he gestured to the glittering world Emma represented, "would exist." Emma blinked, caught off guard by the steel in his tone. She had expected him to be pliable, another man dazzled by her name and influence. Instead, Emma found a wall she couldn't charm her way through. "I see," she said coolly, her mask slipping for just a second. "Then perhaps you're not the man I thought you were." Brody didn't flinch. "No, Emma, I'm exactly the man I need to be, and that's someone who honors the people who built this with me, not the ones who show up after the work is done." She walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the stone. Brody exhaled slowly. For months, he had wrestled with the temptation of old money, the easy path paved by Emma Carson's connections. But in that moment, he felt only clarity. Gwen wasn't just his partner in secret. She was the compass that kept him true, and no amount of charm or wealth could ever replace that. Emma Carson had never struggled for a day in her life, not in the way most people understood struggle. Born into old money, she was raised in marble halls and private academies, groomed for boardrooms before she could drive. Yet Emma had ambition of her own. While her family relied on generational wealth and conservative investments, she wanted influence, her own brand of power. By her late 20s, she had created Carson Data Strategies, a boutique firm that marketed itself as a cutting-edge data analysis consultancy. On paper, the firm studied companies from the inside out, identifying inefficiencies, measuring productivity, and highlighting gaps where marketing, operations, or finance fell short. In practice, Emma used it as her ticket into boardrooms dominated by men who underestimated her until they realized she held their numbers in the palm of her hand. When she met Brody Tucker at that social event, she knew immediately he was different from the men she usually played. He wasn't slick or polished, he was raw, genuine, a builder at heart. But she also saw the opportunity. Tucker and Sons was growing fast, and growth meant cracks. Emma presented herself not as a socialite, but as a professional with solutions. "You've built something incredible," she told him over dinner. "But growth can become a liability without control. My firm specializes in finding the voids, places where you're overspending, or where departments aren't pulling their weight. We save companies money and streamline operations. Let me do that for Tucker and Sons." Brody, though cautious, found her pitch compelling. Gwen had always focused on expansion, branding, and vision. Emma framed her work as balance, efficiency, cost-cutting, practicality. It sounded less like opposition and more like complement. Within weeks, he signed her as an outside consultant, tasked with combing through the company's books and systems. Emma moved quickly to prove herself, because Gwen, the invisible partner, was a problem. She needed to bring a wedge between the two. Emma scheduled interviews with mid-level managers, requesting spreadsheets, performance reports, and budget breakdowns. Her polished smile reassured employees, while her sharp questions unsettled them. She framed her work as finding areas of improvement. But in every conversation, she slipped in conservative philosophies, suggesting cuts, reshaping roles, and pointing out where Tucker and Sons could save by trimming what she viewed as excess. To Brody, within weeks, Emma was in the office with her polished smile and an expensive leather folder. setting up interviews with consulting firms who preached austerity and control. She shook hands with senior managers, asked probing questions, and scribbled notes like she already owned the place. It didn't take long for word to reach Gwen. She was in her own office across town, reviewing a proposal for a new client when her phone buzzed with a text from a colleague. "Is it true Emma Carson's running shop over there now? Heard she's trying to replace you." Gwen's heart tightened. She immediately dialed Brody. When he answered, his voice was casual, warm. "Hey Gwen, what's up?" "I just got a call," she said, trying to keep her tone level. "Are you planning to replace me?" There was a pause, followed by a low laugh. "What? Replace you? Where did you get that from?" "Then why is Emma interviewing other consulting firms inside Tucker and Sons?" Brody's voice was tinged with confusion. "I'm not sure what you're hearing, but I would never replace you. You know that." Gwen wanted to believe him. She did believe him, but doubt crept in anyway. Emma wasn't just circling. She was inside, moving pieces around. That doubt solidified a few days later when her phone rang again, this time from one of Tucker and Sons' senior managers, a man who had always respected Gwen's role even if he didn't fully understand it. "I thought you should know," he said in a hushed tone. "Emma's getting real cozy here. She's talking to people, lining up her own consultants. Brody seems blind to it, maybe even interested in her. Everyone's starting to wonder if she's his new favorite. And honestly, he doesn't see who she really is." Gwen sat in silence, the words cutting deeper than she expected. She had spent years building Brody's confidence, protecting the company from exactly this kind of influence. And now, Emma Carson, the embodiment of old money control, was weaving her way into everything Sam had fought to protect. She ended the call with a polite thank you, but inside, her resolve hardened. If Brody couldn't see Emma for who she was, Gwen would have to make him see, because one thing was certain, Emma wasn't just a threat to the company. She was a threat to the promise Gwen and Brody had made to each other. Gwen had always played the long game. She didn't rush her strategies with clients, and she certainly wasn't about to rush with Emma Carson. If Emma wanted to play games inside Tucker and Sons, Gwen would be 10 moves ahead. The first step was information. Gwen reached out to a trusted private investigator she had used before on a client's competitor case. Within days, Emma's background was mapped out in meticulous detail. The glossy image Emma presented, Ivy League education, pristine family wealth, philanthropic headlines, was just one layer. Beneath it were whispers of ruthless takeovers, quiet buyouts, and a trail of companies that had been swallowed whole under the Carson family's guidance. Each story looked like opportunity on paper, but when Gwen read between the lines, she saw carnage. Families left bankrupt, founders stripped of their legacies. Next, Gwen placed insiders within Tucker and Sons, not officially, of course, but through carefully positioned friends she had been grooming for months, mid-level employees who owed her favors or admired her brilliance enough to keep her informed. They reported on Emma's every movement, every private meeting she tried to arrange, every whisper she fed into the ears of Brody's managers. Gwen didn't stop there. She had surveillance quietly installed, subtle, discreet, cameras in conference rooms, tracking badges that logged movements, audio recorders for calls that passed through the office system. Every email Emma sent, every call she made was captured, archived, and analyzed. Gwen wasn't just gathering dirt. She was building a case airtight enough to crush Emma when the time came. The language was polished, the charts precise, but the message was unmistakable. Trim the community engagement budget, cut back on diversity-driven hiring initiatives, scale down marketing spend in favor of cost stability. It was exactly what Gwen had warned Brody about. Conservative measures that might save dollars today but would strangle growth tomorrow. Gwen leaned back in her chair, her jaw tight. She had spent years positioning Tucker and Sons as forward-thinking, progressive, a company that thrived because it embraced innovation and inclusivity. Emma's so-called improvements weren't just minor tweaks. They were an erosion of everything Gwen had worked to build. She opened her laptop again and cross-referenced the reports with the recommendations she and Brody had agreed on months ago. One by one, she saw the shifts, small, almost invisible, if you didn't know what to look for. A budget line adjusted here, a hiring pipeline delayed there. Not enough to cause alarm, but enough to redirect the company's course if left unchecked. Gwen's chest ached with frustration. Brody might not see it. He trusted too easily, blinded by Emma's confidence and credentials. But Gwen saw it, clearly. Emma wasn't just consulting. She was rewriting Tucker and Sons from the inside, reshaping it into something safe, conservative, and ultimately hollow. Closing her laptop, Gwen exhaled slowly. The evidence was mounting. Emma thought she was clever, subtle, but Gwen had built her career on catching shifts no one else noticed, and she wasn't about to let Emma undo everything. Emma Carson was nothing if not deliberate. She understood how to shape perception, how to plant seeds in public that would bloom into whispers behind closed doors. Over cocktails at yet another gala, she let her hand brush against Brody's arm, just long enough for a photographer to capture it. At luncheons, she leaned in, smiling just a bit too warmly when reporters circled. To Brody, it was harmless. He assumed Emma was talking strictly about business when she told him, "We could be a power couple if you'd let me help you the way I know how." He smiled, thinking she meant Tucker and Sons paired with Carson Data Strategies. Two companies, working in tandem. He didn't realize she meant something far more personal, but the public noticed. Soon headlines floated across social media. Brody Tucker seen with rising star Emma Carson, new power duo. Emma's response to the speculation was always vague, never denying, never confirming. A coy smile here, a cryptic line there. Brody is a man I deeply respect. Where that respect goes, well, time will tell. Gwen, watching from her office miles away, saw it all. The photographs, the vague captions, the rumors piling up like storm clouds. She told herself she wouldn't let it bother her, it was just noise. But each headline felt like a knife. Finally, during one of their weekly calls, she couldn't hold back. "Brody," she said, her tone sharper than usual, "be honest with me. Is there something between you and Emma?" On the other end of the line, there was silence. Then Brody's voice, low and steady. "No, Gwen, nothing. She's persistent, but I don't see her that way. It's hard to move on when the person you want is still in your heart." Gwen's breath caught. For a moment, she forgot how to respond. All these years they had skirted around their feelings, choosing professionalism, burying the truth beneath strategy and sacrifice. "Brody," she whispered, her voice softer now. "Maybe it's time we stop hiding. It's been 5 years. You're established, I'm established. We don't owe anyone secrecy anymore. The world already thinks they know your story. Maybe it's time they hear the truth." On the other, and she heard Brody exhale, a mixture of relief and longing in that single breath. "Gwen, can we talk in person? I need to look you in the eyes when I tell you exactly how I feel. No screens, no distance, no more hiding." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I'm wrapping up this deal in a couple of days," she said, firmly. "After that, I'm coming home to you, not just to visit, to stay. I'm done letting other people write our story." Gwen closed her eyes, her chest tightening with a blend of hope and fear. For years, she had buried her feelings beneath ambition, convincing herself she couldn't risk distraction. But hearing Brody's words, she realized something she had always known, but never admitted. He wasn't a distraction. He was the reason she had kept going when everything seemed impossible. "I'll be waiting," he said finally, his voice steady, though his heart raced. They ended the call, both lingering in the silence that followed. Two people standing at the edge of a choice, 5 years in the making. And for the first time in a long time, Gwen allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like when he finally walked through her door. Not as her silent partner, not as her anchor, but as the man who had always belonged in her heart. Emma's invitation had seemed innocent enough. A small luncheon, she had said over the phone. Just a chance to introduce you to a few people who've worked with my firm. Brody hesitated, but Emma had been relentless these past weeks, and against his better judgment, he agreed. When he arrived, the truth became clear the moment he stepped inside her sprawling home. It wasn't a casual meal. It was an ambush. The dining room was filled with men who smelled of power. Old men in new suits, expensive watches glinting under the chandelier. They stood when Emma introduced him, their smiles polished, their handshakes firm, their eyes calculating. Brody felt the walls closing in. He knew exactly what this was, a sales pitch dressed as hospitality. "I'd like you to meet some of my clients," Emma said sweetly, her hand brushing his arm. "They've all benefited from my firm's strategies, and I believe you could too." Whiskey was poured, aged, smoky, the kind he rarely tasted. They toasted him, praised him, spoke of untapped potential and doors that could open with the right partnerships. Their words came smooth as the liquor, each promise grander than the last. After a while, the conversation turned sharper. One man leaned back, his voice casual but loaded. "You're a young man with promise, Brody, but promise only goes so far without the right alliances. You should consider marrying wisely. Someone like Emma, for instance. She can open doors you never even imagined." The table chuckled, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Emma only smiled, demure, as though she hadn't orchestrated the entire moment. 2 hours of grinding passed. Brody's head ached from the weight of it. Finally, he excused himself and pulled Emma aside into a quieter corner of the house. His jaw was tight, his voice low. "If you want them to invest, have them send a proposal to my office for review," he said firmly. "But remember this, Emma, every decision goes through Sam. She has input on everything. And if you ever pull a stunt like this again, we're done, completely done." Emma tilted her head, her expression cool, unfazed. "Brody, I'm just looking after you. We can do great things together. If this..." Sam truly cared about the direction of the company. He would get on board with what I'm offering. Brody's eyes narrowed. "Don't you ever mistake Sam's role in this company again." Emma's smile barely faltered, though her eyes flickered with annoyance. "Well then, if this person means that much to you, I'm sure you'll eventually find a way out of your agreement. I know lawyers who'd be glad to help." Brody shook his head, disgust rising in his chest. "I need to go." 2 days passed in a blur of restless anticipation. Brody barely slept, his thoughts circling back to the promise he had made on the phone. The deal was wrapped up, the papers signed, and there was only one destination that mattered now. That morning, he walked into his office, left a short note. With his assistant, "I'll be out of town for a few days," he said simply. "No reason, no destination offered." His tone left no room for questions. He wanted no one, least of all Emma, knowing where he was headed. By late afternoon, his truck pulled into the quiet driveway of the secluded beach house. The salty air hit him first, fresh and unburdened. He stepped inside, and there she was. Gwen. Sam to the world, but Gwen to him, always. She stood by the wide glass doors, sunlight painting her skin in golden hues. For a heartbeat they only stared. Then Brody crossed the room in long strides, closing the distance. Without hesitation, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed. Her deep, unrestrained, everything he hadn't been able to say in 5 long years. Words tumbled out afterward, soft against her lips. "I missed you. I love you." Her response was just as fierce. "I love you too." The next 3 days were theirs alone. No calls, no meetings, no investors or board members, just them. They cooked meals together in the open kitchen, walked barefoot along the shoreline, and fell asleep tangled in each other's arms to the sound of waves crashing. Between kisses and laughter, there were tears too, pent-up emotions finally given space to breathe. The mornings were filled with whispered confessions. "I thought I lost you," Gwen admitted one dawn, her head resting against his chest. "You never did," Brody whispered back. "Even when I tried to move on, it was always you." By the time the third morning arrived, the morning they were scheduled to leave, they lay in bed, sunlight spilling across the sheets, speaking of the future. "We can't hide anymore," Gwen said softly, tracing her finger along his arm. "The world already speculates. Let's give them the truth." Brody nodded, determination in his eyes. "After my speech, it's the perfect time. The company is celebrating 25 years. I've been at the helm for 6 of those years, and I'm proud of what we've built. That's when we tell them, you're not just my consultant, you're my partner, in business and in life." Her eyes softened, and she kissed him again. "Then that's what we'll do." The day before the celebration, Gwen arrived back in town. She stayed quietly at Brody's side, avoiding the spotlight, content to savor their stolen hours together. Brody, in turn, cleared his calendar and shut off his phone. For the first time in years, he took days off leading up to an event. Emma noticed. She had called his office again and again, her voice sharp with frustration when she couldn't reach him. "Where is he?" she demanded of assistants, managers, anyone who might know. But no one had an answer. Brody had disappeared, and no one, not even his closest staff, knew where he was. Emma's fury simmered. She had spent months weaving herself into Tucker and Sons, only to be shut out at a critical moment. The upcoming anniversary celebration was meant to be her stage too, a chance to cement her influence. Instead, she was left in the dark, powerless to guess what Brody was planning. Meanwhile, Brody and Gwen moved quietly, deliberately. They rehearsed nothing, but their plan was clear. The truth would come from Brody's lips on his stage at his company's milestone moment. Gwen would no longer be the silent partner hidden in the shadows. She would stand beside him, openly, as both the strategist who had saved Tucker and Sons and the woman he loved. The storm Emma was brewing didn't matter. Not anymore. The sun dipped low as guests arrived at the grand hall, its walls draped in silver and navy banners celebrating 25 years of Tucker and Sons construction. The air buzzed with excitement. Clients, employees, investors, and even local officials filled the space, eager for the milestone event. Earlier that afternoon, a mass email had gone out to the entire guest list. "Brody Tucker looks forward to celebrating this special evening with you all tonight. A personal message will be shared." It was brief, but enough to stir curiosity. Whispers spread quickly. What was the announcement? Expansion? A new partnership? Brody was already there. When Emma Carson arrived, he stood near the entrance, shaking hands, smiling, his posture tall and confident. His crisp navy suit fit like it had been made for him, his tie perfectly knotted. For the first time in weeks, there was a renewed light in his eyes. Emma paused, studying him from across the room. The man looked different, stronger, clearer. She assumed the days he'd been unreachable had been spent resting, perhaps reflecting. Tonight, she decided, would be her night too. She had come prepared. With her were 2 social media influencers, friends who knew how to stage moments, how to capture the right angles, how to spin narratives before the night was even over. After all, Brody had texted her that morning, "I've found clarity. Tonight, I'll make an announcement that will affect our relationship." Emma had taken the words as confirmation. Finally, He had chosen her. Tonight, she would stand beside him as the world learned. Without hesitation, she glided across the floor in her emerald gown, her smile polished, her heels clicking like a countdown. She slipped to his side effortlessly, her hand grazing his arm as though it belonged there. "Brody," she said brightly, leaning close, "you look incredible tonight. Rested, ready." He glanced at her politely, but his attention quickly turned back to the line of guests waiting to greet him. That didn't deter her. Emma anchored herself at his side, laughing lightly at comments, whispering in his ear, her hand brushing his sleeve at every opportunity. To the watching crowd, the picture was convincing. Brody Tucker and Emma Carson, dazzling together, a power couple in the making. Cameras flashed, influencers snapped photos, and whispers rippled across the hall. Emma's smile widened. Tonight, she thought, the world would finally see them as she did. What she didn't realize was that Brody's announcement wasn't about her at all. The room quieted as the MC's voice rang out, "Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Brody Tucker." Brody rose from his seat, the applause washing over him as he walked steadily to the podium. Emma stayed close, ready to bask in the glow of what she assumed was her moment. Cameras flashed, the crowd leaning forward in anticipation. Brody cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone. His eyes scanned the room. Employees, investors, family friends, men who had been with his father on job sites decades ago, and women who had organized fundraisers to keep the business afloat during lean years. His voice carried with the weight of both memory and pride. "My father founded Tucker & Sons Construction 25 years ago with a vision. He believed in building not just homes, but futures. He dedicated himself to this work and to the families it supported. Many of you here worked beside him, and your loyalty to him and to this company has never been forgotten." A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the crowd. Brody's voice softened. "When my father passed, he left behind more than a legacy. He left responsibility. A company with loyal men and women and a mountain of debts. For a long time, I thought I couldn't carry it. I thought I'd let everyone down." The room was hushed, listening intently. Brody straightened, his tone firming. "But then something happened. Someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Someone saw potential when all I saw was failure. Someone stood beside me, quietly, faithfully, while I rebuilt Tucker & Sons into what you see today." He paused, his words hanging heavy in the air. "Most of you know this person as Sam, my silent partner." Emma's heart leapt. She smiled broadly, ready to step forward. Finally, she thought, he's acknowledging us. Brody took a deep breath, his lips curving into a smile as he extended his hand to the right. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to reveal Sam's identity. Please welcome, but most of you already know her as Gwendolyn Meyers." The room erupted. Gasps, cheers, applause. The doors to the side of the stage opened, and Gwen, poised, radiant in a sleek navy dress, walked gracefully toward him. She took his outstretched hand, and Brody drew her close, greeting her not with a handshake but with a kiss on the lips. The audience leapt to their feet, clapping and cheering wildly. Phones shot into the air, capturing the moment that would soon explode across every platform and headline. For years, people had speculated about Gwen's role. Tonight, they had their answer. When the sound finally died down, Brody wasn't finished. He tightened his arm around Gwen, his voice steady and full of conviction. "She isn't just my silent partner, she is the love of my life, and soon—" He glanced at her, his eyes shining. "She will be my wife." The crowd roared even louder than before. The applause thundered through the hall, the cheers echoing off the walls. Employees who had worked under Brody for years shouted their congratulations. Investors rose from their seats, nodding in approval. Even the press, usually stoic, seemed swept up in the energy. Emma, however, sat frozen. Her face shifted through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, disbelief, fury, hurt, humiliation. She clenched her glass so tightly she thought it might shatter. For weeks she had told herself she was the chosen one, that her name and pedigree would cement her place by Brody's side. And yet, here he was, declaring his loyalty not just to Gwen, but to their future together. She forced her lips into a brittle smile, her hands clapping stiffly with the rest of the crowd. The cameras swept across the room, and Emma knew she couldn't afford to look bitter or exposed. So she joined in the applause, her expression a mask, even as her insides twisted. On stage, Gwen and Brody stood hand in hand, united, unshaken. The rumors, the whispers, the secrecy, they were over. What had been hidden was now celebrated openly, not just as business partners, but as soulmates. In that moment, Tucker & Sons wasn't just celebrating 25 years of business. It was celebrating a new chapter, a chapter where its leader stood tall, no longer burdened by debts or doubt, but anchored by love and partnership. And though Emma clapped along with the crowd, she knew she had been outplayed. Gwendolyn Meyers wasn't just his consultant. She was the heart of his company, and the woman he had chosen forever. Emma Carson spent the rest of weekend behind drawn curtains, pacing the length of her penthouse. Her phone buzzed with texts from curious friends and investors. She ignored them all. The humiliation of Friday night still burned hot in her chest. She had clapped for Gwen and Brody like everyone else, but inside, her rage had curdled into a single, gnawing thought. How do I maintain control? By Monday morning, she had convinced herself there was still a way. Brody valued her insights. He had said as much. Surely her position in Tucker & Sons could be leveraged. Perhaps she would be given a more professional role, an official title. She smoothed her emerald blazer, applied a final swipe of lipstick, and strode into the office with her head high. But her steps faltered when she reached her door. The plaque that once bore her name, Emma Carson Consultant, was gone. In its place was nothing but polished wood. Her heart lurched. Before she could demand answers, Brody's assistant appeared. "Miss Carson, Mr. Tucker asked me to bring you to the conference room. He wants to explain your role moving forward." Emma forced a smile, relief flooding her. So, it's a promotion, she thought. Finally, the recognition I deserve. She followed the assistant down the hall, her heels striking like a drumbeat of anticipation. But when she pushed open the conference room door, her world shifted. At the head of the long table sat Gwen, poised, composed, her dark eyes steady. Brody was nowhere in sight. "Miss Carson," Gwen said smoothly, gesturing toward a chair. "Have a seat." Emma's jaw tightened. "Where's Brody?" she snapped. "Oh, he'll be here soon," Gwen replied. "But I wanted to see you first." Emma dropped her purse on the table, her eyes narrowing. "Did you remove my name from the door?" Gwen's smile was cool, unwavering. "I sure did." "You have no right," Emma hissed. "Brody hired me. We have a contract." "Yes, we do," Gwen said, her tone sharpening. "But you made it void when you began digging into personnel files. That's a legal violation." Before Emma could retort, Gwen slid a small thumb drive across the table, followed by a manila folder. "This," she said evenly, "is everything about you. Every dummy company you created to trick men like Brody into signing with your family's interests. The same schemes you used to trap other companies under the Carson name." Emma's face drained of color. She reached for the folder, flipping through photos, records, financial statements. Every deception laid bare. "You've been planning this," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "I've been protecting this company," Gwen corrected. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze hard. "You need to leave Tucker & Sons quietly. No lawsuits, no theatrics. Walk away, and this never reaches Brody's hands. Stay, and I'll show him everything. Understand something, Emma. He's mine. He always has been." Emma's throat tightened as she pushed the folder back across the table. For a moment, she considered a retort, a threat, something to claw back her dignity. But the evidence was too damning. Still, she wouldn't give Gwen the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Rising to her feet, she adjusted her blazer with trembling fingers. "You've been planning this for a long time," she spat. "But don't think this is over. I will have the last say." Gwen leaned back, utterly composed. "Have a good day, Ms. Carson." Emma turned on her heel, her heels clicking furiously against the tile. She didn't see Gwen's faint, satisfied smile as the door swung shut behind her. For the first time in years, Emma Carson realized she wasn't the hunter. She was the prey, and Gwendolyn Meyers had outplayed her at every turn. When Emma stormed out of the conference room, Gwen sat still for several moments, her hands folded neatly on the table. She knew Emma wasn't finished. Women like her rarely walked away quietly. Still, Gwen had played her cards carefully. The evidence was airtight, the leverage undeniable. All that remained was to tell Brody the truth. An hour later, Brody entered the conference room, his tie loosened from a morning of handshakes and follow-ups after the anniversary event. He looked at Gwen, noting the calm in her eyes. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes." Gwen slid the folder across the table. "You should know what Emma's been doing." Brody opened it, his brow furrowing as he skimmed through the documents. Fake company registrations, shell firms under the Carson name, contracts designed to funnel power back to her family. His jaw tightened. She used all this to get in here? "She's been running this scheme for years," Gwen said softly. "Your instincts were right to trust me, but Emma's specialty is manipulation. She dangles the illusion of opportunity and traps men into thinking they can't succeed without her. She tried it with you, but she didn't count on me being here." Brody set the folder down with a heavy sigh. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing in his eyes. "And I let her get too close." "You didn't know," Gwen reassured him. "She's good at what she does, but now you know, and you're free of her." Brody leaned across the table, his eyes locking with Gwen's. "I don't want to just be free of her. I want this company, our company, protected. No more secrets. From here on out, you're not just behind the scenes. You're beside me. Everyone will know it." Her lips curved into a small smile. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Emma, meanwhile, wasn't finished. That evening, she sat in her penthouse, fury burning through her veins. Gwen had outmaneuvered her in the conference room, but Emma still had resources, contacts in the press, powerful family connections, and a reputation she had crafted over years. She refused to let one woman dismantle it all. She dialed a number from memory. "I need a favor," she said into the phone. "I've got a story for you, about a company being manipulated from the inside by a woman who shouldn't be anywhere near it." The reporter on the other end hesitated. "You mean Tucker and Sons, after their big celebration?" "Yes," Emma snapped. "The so-called partner he revealed? She's not what she seems. I have proof she's been pulling strings for years, hiding in the shadows. Doesn't that sound like a story worth telling?" She hung up, pacing the room. If she couldn't control Tucker and Sons, she would scorch the ground beneath Gwen's feet. She pictured the headlines. "Silent partner or puppet master." The whispers would be enough to sow doubt, to taint Gwen's reputation, and maybe even shake Brody's trust. But what Emma didn't know was that Gwen was already prepared. Surveillance files, witness accounts, evidence of Emma's manipulations, all of it had been quietly tucked away for this exact scenario. The moment Emma moved, Gwen would have the receipts to crush her story before it spread. Still, Emma smiled to herself, her glass of wine trembling slightly in her grip. "Enjoy your victory, Gwen," she murmured, "because I promise you it won't last." The next morning, Brody and Gwen met in his office, the sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Brody took her hand, squeezing it firmly. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Gwen nodded, though in her heart she already knew Emma wasn't gone. Not yet. But this time Gwen wasn't just defending a company. She was defending the man she loved, the life they were finally ready to claim openly. And no matter what storm Emma Carson unleashed, Gwen was ready. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that usually came before a storm. Gwen and Brody sat together at the breakfast table in his kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the breeze drifting through the open window. She was about to comment on how rare these moments of peace had become when her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, scanned the message, and her expression hardened. She did it. Emma's smear story is scheduled to be released at noon, today. Brody set down his coffee mug with deliberate calm. "So, she hasn't walked away?" "No," Gwen murmured, her thumb tightening around the phone. "And if this goes live, she'll drag both of us through the mud." Brody leaned across the table, tilting her chin toward him, and pressed a kiss to her lips. "Then we don't wait for her. We bring her down first." Gwen exhaled, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I love you. I love you too," Brody replied. "Now let's get dressed. We have a company to protect." When they walked into the office a short while later, their lawyer was already waiting in the conference room, a thick folder spread across the polished table. He looked up, his expression grave but steady. "You've gathered enough evidence to not only discredit her story, but to turn the tables entirely. The question is, how public do you want this?" "Very public," Brody said firmly. "If she wanted an audience, we'll give her one." The lawyer nodded, sliding papers toward them. "Here's the plan. At 10 o'clock sharp, we hold a press conference. You'll announce Emma Carson is no longer affiliated with Tucker & Sons. Present the evidence. Show the steps we've already taken with the city prosecutor's office. That way, by the time her story drops at noon, it will already be dead in the water." Gwen glanced at Brody, noting the spark of determination in his eyes. But there was something else there too, something she couldn't quite place. By 10 o'clock, the conference room was packed. Reporters lined the walls, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward as the buzz of curiosity filled the air. Brody and Gwen walked in together, shoulders squared, their lawyer at their side. Brody stood tall behind the podium, his deep voice cutting through the clamor. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice. This morning, we want to address something important. Effective immediately, Ms. Emma Carson and her consulting firm are no longer affiliated with Tucker & Sons Construction." The room erupted. In gasps and hurried whispers, reporters shouted questions, but Brody raised his hand, silencing them. "We have gathered evidence of misconduct and illegal activity," he continued, his tone unflinching. "Emma Carson attempted to infiltrate this company under false pretenses. She created shell corporations, accessed personnel files without authorization, and used manipulative tactics to undermine Tucker & Sons from within. We know she has plans to release a story designed to damage us, but we will not waste time entertaining lies. Instead, we've already submitted our findings to the city prosecutor's office." The room exploded again, cameras flashing, reporters calling out questions. Gwen stood just to the side, calm but unyielding, her presence radiating quiet authority. Then, Brody raised his hand again. "But I don't want this day to be remembered for the downfall of Ms. Carson." He paused, letting the room settle. "I want it to be remembered for something greater." He turned then, motioning for Gwen to join him at the podium. She stepped forward, her heart racing, uncertain what he was doing. Brody took her hand, his gaze locked on hers. His voice softened, though the microphones carried every word. "This woman has been called my silent partner, but she's been much more than that. She saw me when no one else did. She stood by me when this company was on the edge of collapse. She built Tucker and Sons into what it is today, and she built me into the man I am, the crowd murmured, leaning closer. Cameras zoomed in. Brody took a deep breath, then slowly dropped to one knee. Gasps filled the room. Gwen's hand flew to her mouth, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "For 5 years," Brody said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've loved you in silence, always holding back, always hiding, but no more. Gwendolyn Meyers, I don't want to hide another day. I want to love you openly for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" Gwen's tears spilled freely as she nodded, her voice breaking but clear. "Yes, forever yes." The crowd erupted, clapping, cheering, the roar nearly shaking the room. Reporters forgot their pens and cameras for a moment, swept up in the raw emotion before them. Brody rose, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her. The kiss was fierce, unashamed, sealing not just their love, but their victory. Behind them, the lawyer discreetly closed the folder of evidence. The battle with Emma was already won. The real story, the one that would be printed in tomorrow's papers, wasn't about her betrayal. It was about the construction magnate who had knelt before the brilliant woman who saved his company, and the love that had turned survival into triumph. And in that moment, standing in front of the world, Gwen and Brody knew they had everything they needed. 4 months had passed since the press conference that changed everything. Tucker and Sons had emerged stronger than ever. Their story of resilience and loyalty splashed across headlines for weeks. But today wasn't about the company. Today was about them. The chapel glowed in soft golden light, sunlight streaming through, stained glass windows that painted the aisle in hues of sapphire, ruby, and emerald. Guests filled the pews, family, friends, employees who had stood with Brody through thick and thin. The hum of quiet excitement filled the air, settling into silence as the music began. At the back of the aisle stood Gwen, radiant. Her gown was elegant and timeless, its fitted bodice giving way to a flowing skirt that trailed gracefully behind her. A veil framed her face, though nothing could hide the brilliance of her smile. Her heart raced, but not with nerves, only with joy. Brody stood at the altar, his broad shoulders squared in a tailored suit. But it wasn't the suit or the setting that made him shine. It was the look in his eyes as he saw her. For a moment, the world disappeared. He saw only the woman who had rescued him, believed in him, and loved him when he couldn't even love himself. Step by step, Gwen walked down the aisle, her eyes never leaving his. She thought of everything that had led them here. The diner where she first saw him broken but unbowed, the nights of whispered strategies, the battles with Emma, the promise they had made to always stand together. Each memory was a stone laid on the path that brought her to this moment. When she reached him, Brody took her hand, steady and warm. The officiant began to speak, but neither of them heard much. They were lost in each other, silently exchanging the vows they had already lived. Trust, loyalty, love without condition, and when the words, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," rang through the air, Brody pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion as the first kiss in the beach house. The crowd erupted in applause, but all Gwen felt was the surety that this was forever. 6 months had passed since Gwen and Brody exchanged vows, and their life together had settled into a rhythm of love, laughter, and shared purpose. Tucker and Sons continued to flourish, stronger than ever, while Meyers' strategies expanded into new markets, her name now spoken with respect across the industry. But outside their world of joy, Emma Carson's empire had crumbled. The investigation Gwen had quietly prepared was thorough and relentless. Federal prosecutors seized on the evidence: dummy corporations, fraudulent contracts, falsified audits, and predatory schemes designed to siphon wealth and power into the Carson name. Former victims came forward in droves, emboldened by Gwen and Brody's public stance. The trial was swift. Emma's defense team tried to paint her as misunderstood, a businesswoman caught in the gears of ambition. But the evidence was too damning. Files, recordings, even testimonies from her own associates. The courtroom gasped when the judge delivered. The verdict: guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of corporate funds. Emma Carson was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Her once proud family name, whispered like royalty in certain circles, was dragged through the mud. The Carson family, long shielded by old money and reputation, was ordered to pay restitution to every victim Emma had ensnared. The amount was staggering, but justice demanded nothing less. Brody and Gwen didn't attend the sentencing. They didn't need to. They had already moved forward, their future bright. But when the news broke, Gwen allowed herself a small smile. Emma's shadow no longer loomed over them. The story was closed, and for the first time, the path ahead was theirs alone, untouched by schemes, free from manipulation, built only on truth and love. 6 months after Emma's sentencing, Gwen stood in their kitchen, with a hand resting gently against her stomach, a secret smile tugging at her lips. Brody was making coffee when she finally said it. "We're going to need more room," she teased. He turned, confused. "More room? What for?" Gwen's smile widened. "For a nursery." The mug nearly slipped from his hands. "A nursery?" His voice cracked in disbelief. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're having a baby, Brody." For a moment, he was silent, his jaw slack, before crossing the room in 2 strides. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around, laughter breaking from his chest. "A baby? Gwen, you've given me everything. How could life get any better?" They had weathered storms, they had fought battles, and now they were creating something lasting, a future written not in shadows or secrecy, but in love, trust, and the promise of generations to come. The end. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful story by Green Tea Tales. Help support our channel with comments and don't forget to subscribe.